Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com again, and as you might recall from my last few videos, I've been focusing on particular regions, either of Italy or France or Switzerland or Belgium, right? And today I'm following through with that trend, that trajectory I started for myself with the decks that I have from Bologna, from the Bologna region of Italy. I may have more, and I'm not aware that they're from Bologna. I've tried to do my research, and from what I understand, these are the four that I own. And it wouldn't be a Maryland video without me pulling out the map. It always helps to know where you're talking about. And Bologna would be in this region here, the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy. Now, we did the Piedmont decks. My last video was the Piedmont decks, which, as we discussed, Piedmont is nestled in here with Switzerland and what was happening in France, particularly Marseille, right? So the decks from Bologna have a little bit of distance from that, and they, I would think, would have their own traditional style of tarot. And the four decks that I'm using to represent what I have from Bologna are the Mitelli. It's identified as from Bologna, 1660 more or less. This particular deck is put out by Lo Scarabeo in the Anima Antiqua series they have. I don't know if it's still available. Some of these decks may be hard to come by. The second deck I'm using is identified as the Tarocchi Fina Dalla Torre in Bologna. There's no date more committal than just 17th century, so we know it's sometime in the 1600s of Bologna. This deck was beautifully put together by the International Museum of Tarot. Beautiful deck, beautiful deck. The next deck is very similar. The Tarocco Bolognese al Mondo. This deck was created by Marco Benedetti, and I know for a fact that this deck is extremely rare to come by. There's only one existing deck that exists from its day, probably from the 1720s, and it exists in only one museum. And as far as I know, Marco Benedetti is the only person who has gotten permission to run a run of these cards, and he only ran a run of 20. So I think this is an extremely rare deck, for sure. And then I have the Giacomo Zoni tarot deck from 1780, which Lo Scarabeo calls Ancient Tarot of Bologna. Now, I do know that this one is is rare. It's out of print. In fact, I don't know how many of these are out of print. I know for the Fina della Torre, I had copy 180 out of 200. And I got it late in the game, obviously, and I got it a couple of years ago. So I don't even know if any of this is left. So why am I showing you decks that, you may never get your hands on? I think this one might be available. Well, there's a lot of decks that we'll never get our hands on that I'd be chomping at the bit to ever see, but they don't exist or they haven't been reproduced, So even though, you might not be able to run out and buy these cards, these particular decks, you'll still see them by virtue of this video. And, it may help fill in some of the gaps of some of the other decks that you do have, or some of the other videos that you've watched, from me and others who, are focused on the history of tarot. So that's that. So I apologize if you have frustration in probably not being able to get your hands on most of these decks. But I hope that by sharing what I have with you, will prove to be interesting. Okay, from the Mitelli. We saw this character before, I think in one of the Minchiati, right? A disheveled individual. He's carrying something that looks like something that can't possibly be, like an inflated balloon. Obviously, it can't be, even though that's what it looks like. And some kind of thing that might be affected by the direction of the wind. He's got a feather in his cap, or what looks to be feather-like. So we have the sense then of, a carefree wanderer, or he is engaged in some type of activity. Maybe we just can't recognize what these objects are because we're, 500 years removed, right? I think I knew at one point what they were. Then I thought maybe they were musical, but I don't know for sure. But then the next card from the Fine della Torre, we definitely have someone engaged in music. And he's, outdoors just like this guy is, and he's passing through, but he's making sounds, he's making music. So then that kind of puts the idea in the head that, in Bologna, the tradition would be of a performer, like somebody who is musically inclined. Maybe these are musical instruments, I don't know. Maybe he's like a one-man band. And then we have something very similar. And in the Zoni, what do we have? We have something that's very much in keeping with the Tarot of Marseille tradition, right? And although this is technically a deck created in Bologna, it's not following the tradition of at least these two cards, which would have been very much in keeping with the Bologna style. Bolognese. We'll find out. We'll have reasons for that. The second card, kind of in the Mitelli, it's kind of an extension of this guy, right? This guy is, kind of a pitiful looking guy, but this guy has an audience. And he, too, appears to be making some kind of music. And his audience appears to be children, and he's out of doors. So then we get the sense, that he's an outdoor performer. Maybe somebody passing through. His livelihood is to entertain children. And he puts up a puppet show or a magic show or a music show or whatever. And then he goes through, to the next town. And we get the sense in the Fine della Torre that he also has an audience of children, as he does in the Mondo. But here he looks like, and he's outdoors, but here he looks like he's kind of a sleight of hand kind of performer. So he's not, a musical performer, but maybe one, like a magician who, again, just goes from town to town making his living. And here we do have that. There's no children in the audience that we see. But he definitely kind of looks like, the kind of individual, like a mountebank, right? Okay, now here's where the Bolognese decks get interesting. We have the stretch from 2 to 5. Now, in the Mitelli deck, we don't have a female pope. And even if you say, well, you have your male papacy cards confused, they both have beards, right? I don't know which of these papacy cards would have come first. I could have them wrong. Then we have a younger or perhaps a feminine, and I guess it is feminine because this appears to be a dress. So a female empress with her emperor, and then another card that resembles the papacy. So we do see a little bit of a deviation from what we see in Marseille, right? Where we have, or other Italian decks, where we have the female pope, we have the empress, the emperor, and then the pope. So we see a little bit of a deviation happening here in 1660 Bologna. In the Dalla Torre, we have the sequence of cards that we're accustomed to. What appears to be a female pope, the empress, the emperor, and then the pope. Now, like I said, this is sometime between 1600 and 1699, right? But in 1725, it became a law for card makers to have the four Moors occupy the sequence of 2 to 5, which would have been the female pope, the empress, the emperor, and the pope. Now, interestingly, we have 2 cards which do have celestial references, which might have been code for, this is the, this is the of the higher order. These would be maybe the religious people, right? Whereas these 2 guys would be the secular. And again, I'm not really sure of the order. Now, I know actually, they might not have had numeric value, but I don't know what order they would have been, published, in the deck. But when these cards appeared, they all had the same value. So they were all of equal value. Because they couldn't have any kind of, hierarchy where anything secular was above the papacy, right? So this was really a decree by the Pope or the papacy, declaring that, the Pope should never be put up against other, secular rulers or, or religious rulers. He had to maintain that he was in charge. So obliterating the hierarchy, that would even put him on the map. He chose to have, people that don't even represent what he stands for. And then the Zoni we have from 1780, I think I said. Right, I think I said 1780, right? So here we have 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if it was law that the 4 Moors replaced these cards as of 1725, and here we have 1780 and we have these cards, we know that they wouldn't have been sold and used in Bologna. It just wouldn't have been. I mean, you get in trouble for playing a deck of this type in Bologna. So it must have been a deck for export to France or to other areas of Italy, where this wasn't a problem. But we saw how, it was a problem, with the Swiss and the Belgium, right? Those decks, they replaced those 2 to 5 cards. And they're even doing a little bit of that here, So maybe the switcheroo, that occurred, I don't know. Maybe it was a trend begun in Bologna. I don't know. Okay, the lover card. In the Mitelli, we have a Cupid holding a flaming heart. He's blindfolded with, of course, wings and his accoutrements of bow and arrow. In the Dalla Torre and the Mondo, we have a couple by a fountain with an unmasked Cupid. A very similar card. And you'll notice, I might as well mention it from here. You'll notice that in the Bolognese decks, there's all these random dots all over the place. And you'll see it on all three of these decks. Now, I don't know if Bologna understood what all these random dots meant, and they were deliberate. That looks pretty deliberate, right? That looks pretty deliberate. It follows the halo. But then these seem pretty random. Okay, it is at the base of the font or the fountain. It makes you like, was it glue? Was that like in Bologna was using some funky glue in the card manufacturing, process? You see a couple, here. Or what? Like, I don't know. It's like, I guess, a question for the ages. But at any rate, we have very similar lever cards here, where we have a font, a fountain, a couple by a fountain with Cupid. And then, again, with the Zoni, it's, it makes sense then to see this in the context of having been marketed for export to France, because, this is very much in keeping with the Tarot of Marseille. And although he has a band across his forehead, he's not blindfolded. Okay, moving right along. The charioteer, or the chariot card. The charioteer is a woman. She's on a very simple chariot. And there's nothing that runs this chariot. But at the foot of the chariot, we see two birds. Maybe they're doves or something. But they're not tethered to the chariot, per se. So, we can't say that they're guiding the chariot or anything. And in these two decks, we have a very similar image of some type of secular victor, right? He's got the globe, and maybe he's a prince, and maybe he's being paraded on a platform, during a special period of time, a parade. Maybe he accomplished something wonderful, like we might have parades in the old days for astronauts, and we still do for sports heroes, right? And then here we have the chariot, which is very much in keeping with TDM1, with the scalloped canopy. Okay, justice. Across the board, whenever we see justice, we seem to see the same, ingredients. A woman, her scale, her sword. Here she's very casual. These two decks, a bit more formal. Very similar to one another. And in her hand, she does have something that is different from other justices, and she has a type of orb, identifying something about her, which I, unfortunately, off the top of my head, can't think of, but maybe secular or even spiritual nature, right? She has a virtue, and so I think that would be the reference there. And again, although technically a Bolognese deck, we see, more in keeping with the style of the TDM. She doesn't have the orb, right, that the other Bolognese decks have. And did she have it here? No, she did not have an orb here. So in 1660, Mitelli did not depict her with an orb. Okay, the hermit. We have a winged fellow, destitute, incapacitated, injured. Probably older. His beard seems to not match his hair exactly, so maybe it's grayed. We have a winged person in these two cards, on crutches also, but with a column in the background, which is interesting. And again, there's dots, on his head up here on the pillar. Like, were they gluing something? Here the dots go up his leg, you know, maybe in convenient places. Maybe they knew that, you know, the ink would eventually show through, so maybe they tried to put them in spots that might in time look like a pattern if they had that much forethought with it. And with the Zoni, more in keeping with what we're accustomed to seeing with TDM style. Fortune's wheel. Here she's emptying a cloth bag, you know, showing riches or lack of or loss of. And we have more in keeping with the idea of, you know, various stages of humankind. You know, sometimes you're on top of the world, sometimes you have no reign at all, sometimes you're going up and sometimes you're going down. And again, the random dots. I don't want this video to be a video about the stupid random dots, but I think probably if you see a old Italian deck or an ancient deck that's got a lot of dots on it, I'm wondering if you could guess that it's a Bolognese, because it's the only place where I've seen. I don't see it here. Okay, Fortitude. A woman by a pillar. Obvious references to antiquity. Appears to be a woman, allegoric for fortitude, strength, with the column. And the same type of representation here. And then, of course, here we have, if it goes to a French audience, then it makes a lot of sense that it would have this image. So the Bolognese, you know, the Bolognese tradition for fortitude, I'm guessing that's where we get the column, right? They're not the only Italian decks where we see the column, but they are consistent throughout, with the exception of Zoni, who does his own thing. Now, you know, this is a really strange depiction of the hanged man. You know, I don't know if this is an individual who's being punished, if this is his punishment for whatever crime. You know, I'm not from that period of time, and I'm not readily familiar with what this represented, which would have probably been easily recognizable by its audience. But as it parallels in the deck with all other decks is that of the traitor, or somebody who's punished for a crime, then I can only surmise that, you know, this is, you know, one way of depicting, you know, the punishment for having done that crime, and maybe it would have been readily recognized. I've read, and I don't remember where, that it might have been a reference to Abraham and Isaac, you know, sacrificing his son, you know, for God, and being interrupted at the last moment. But we don't see an angel here, you know. And that context, or that description of this card, would not be in keeping with the tradition of punishment, right? So I have to believe that this is about punishment. And here we have, in keeping with one another, very similar, the hanged individual. He's awake, because that was the point of the images of the day, was to humiliate and embarrass whoever they represented for their shame and disgrace, right? And in this, you know, style of hanging, it was believed that it was done for treason. So this is not just a card of, you know, punishment for crime, but humiliation, right? And it is still similar with the Zoni. The Zoni is still similar. And you see all these dots again, right? All these dots. Here it's 3 clusters of 3 in that space around the head. And here it's just, I don't know. It's like if you were like, had a need to like daub something with glue and you just put dot, 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 you know, maybe you put them along seams or someplace in the context of the picture that makes sense, or sometimes they're, I don't know. But if they were deliberate, why? What are they about? Okay, death kind of is very similar in any language. And there is a scythe on these two. He's on a horse. You know, in some ways, it just seems like a very festive card because all these red lines and squiggles and stuff make it feel like there's confetti, right? Like you know, almost like he's a celebrated character, like the chariot, you know? So it's kind of weird. But here he's more like the Grim Reaper, and he's got a clock or a timepiece, you know, what are they called? Hourglass. Wow, and a reference to maybe an ancient pyramid from antiquity, right? Or maybe I'm misrepresenting what that is. Temperance. Two different colored vessels. A young woman. I don't know what age she is, but an elegant pose. Here she's seated as she is in the Mondo. And the transference or the mixing or the dilution of one liquid into the other jar. And she's outside. Interesting. She is outdoors. I guess she's not always outdoors. I guess in most decks she is, though. Now we have the devil. We got the fire and brimstone devil with, you know, wings that are different from a virtue's wings or different from an angel's wings, right? He's kind of got like creepy bat wings and horns in his head and animal ears, like a jackass ears. He's got some type of dragon, serpent kind of thing. And there are not two individuals, you know, tethered to him in you know, enslavement to him. Okay, here we have a very expressive devil, as we do here. Pitchfork, flames, and the tongue. He doesn't have that happening here. Kind of a repulsive creature. And here we see, you know, that he has his associates, you know, tethered, chained to his mound, whatever he's standing on. He looks kind of comical, like he's patting. Good job, son. He's holding some kind of torch, maybe. So this is interesting. We have, and I've said this before in other videos, for the tower, they're not named, there's no names on them, but would have been understood as a parallel card to the house of God or the tower, right? It does seem like this person is struck by lightning. And I've said before, you know, it's kind of like, may God strike me dead if I'm lying. And then this is what happens, right? So kind of like a punishment, you know, kind of a punishment. I think of when I see the tower, the classical tower, you know, vanity comes before the fall. You know, if you think of it in terms of maybe the Tower of Babel, where, you know, man thought they were so great, they, you know, building a tower to, you know, high, you know, as high to God, and for their vanity, God, destroyed the tower and made them all speak different languages, right? So it's like they were so proud, and then God cut them to size. So vanity before the fall. So, I'm not exactly sure, what this is representing. If may God strike me dead, or just being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And then here we have unnamed, but we have a lovely tower, a different tower from what we're used to seeing. Unfortunately, with people, falling to their deaths, very similar. They seem to be, something knocked them over. Something knocked the crown over. Again, all those dots. Now, those are probably deliberate because we see them in other Marseille style decks, right? Okay. Here's the star. And, it throws you, right? Because, you recognize that this became in some decks the hermit card. That he's like an older version of the fool, He's still wandering. Maybe he's a little better off, He doesn't look as bad. Now he goes by night. But I don't know if it had anything to do with that. It's just, the card they represent for the star because of the concept of the star. So this was a nighttime scene. And in these two cards, we have kind of like a marriage, right? Like something is being blessed by the heavens. It's kind of similar, and I could understand getting it confused for the lover card, right? Except that there's no Cupid. In place of Cupid, we have a star. And the Zoni, in keeping with the, constellation of Aquarius as the star card. With the water pitchers, maybe possibly the irrigation of land or whatever. Okay, the moon. A clear reference to Diana, her dog, the hunt. And here a nighttime scene, with astrologers or astronomers. They certainly have, their tools. And we saw this in the Belgian decks as well, right? But here we have, in keeping with the Tarot of Marseille, the sun god. That is how Mitelli represented the card, the sun, right? Using the god of the sun, right? The sun god. So it'd be Apollo with his lyra, I think that is called, or his harp lake. Here we have women spinning for the moon. And we saw this before too. So we see how different countries and different regions cross-reference one another. It could be that it's a reference to like some story from antiquity about fate being spun, like like a thread or something like that. Or it could be that women are identified with the moon for their cycle, and that spinning or whatever process this was with thread was a woman's work. And so it's this card was just governed by women and what women did. So I don't know. And then we have the angel card, which I have in the reverse order because I believe in Bologna, actually the angel card was the last card. What is it numbered? 20? No, I guess not. So the angel card, the angel blows a horn. There's no reference to the resurrection, of individuals, or the last judgment, rather, of individuals. But here it is. People being awakened from the heavens to be held accountable for their sins and transgressions. And I guess also to reap their reward if they did well. We have that image here as well. And then the world card, Mitelli chose to have an, allegorical, or his, scene from antiquity, right? If you saw this, you might not think like you have the world by, you could say you have the world in your hands, but, but you also have an enormous burden, right? Here we have like a scene that kind of looks more victorious. No effort is being expended in order to be at the top of the image of the individual represented here. And then this one seemed to be in keeping with, although I can't tell if it's a male or female, but with the 4 biblical beasts, in reference to Christ's ascension into heaven. Okay, the aces of swords. Some type of banner with, language that I can't read. This is an unusual, that's a very unusual sword, right? Again, they're very similar. The only real difference between these two decks is that one has 4 moors and the other doesn't. Again, those dots. And I think I did this wrong. Well, I think I got these out of order. Sorry. But this is the swords. To the 2 here, very similar. You almost wouldn't even know that these were swords, And this. Yeah, sorry, I screwed up. I don't know what I did wrong. And the numbers are right there, duh. What have I done? 1. Oh, I know why. Okay, because 2 through 5 were removed for play. Because the style of playing in Bologna, they had a style where 2s through 5s were removed. Okay, I got it. I got confused for a second. So I'm wondering if this deck then, if these cards were recreated for the benefit of, for having a full deck, a full cartomantic deck, because this deck comes with them. So I don't know. I don't really know if they were just added for the sake of giving us a full deck. So we have 2, 3, 4, 5. So I don't know. I don't know if this was, those cards were added to this deck, or if it would have really been more in keeping with the tradition of Bologna to play, their game. It was a 62 card deck, so they removed those cards. It took me a while to remember. And then 3, 4, 5. Okay, so here we have 8. I must have screwed up somewhere. 9, 10. Okay, my bad. Thank you for being so patient. Okay, so now we're at 6. We're on the same page. So without the numbers, on top, I'd probably be confused, 2, 4, 6, but I might have been a little confused. I know I probably wouldn't have been a good person to play with or to have as a partner without a number, you know, because I'd be forever confused, like, what? You know, so I'd say, well, there's 3 here, so this must be 6. But it would take me a while to always figure it out, probably. So you had to be astute. And, you know, here we see a flower in the occupying the negative space, right? We see that in the TDM, but we're not seeing that here in the Bolognese. And this, you know, the Mitelli is very expressive. You know, it reminds me of the Vachetta. I've done a video of the Vachetta tarot deck. I wonder how much, you know, Vachetta, who did that deck, you know, was calling to mind, you know, the Mitelli deck or the feel of it. Quite different with these cards. Notice that the Zoni, the sword goes up, which is, I think, how it was, you know, delivered to me. Whereas with these, it's down. I didn't change the order. You know, I didn't reverse the cards, in other words. Very, very pretty. Different. Right? These, more what we're used to. And I'm just going to cut to the chase and skip through some of these. This one is quite different. And for the 10, and we'll notice in the Bolognese that we have the 8, the 9, and the 10. So this is a little different from the other cards that we've seen, right? Because usually the even numbers just have even amounts. But this one has, you know, 8 and then 2, horizontal and vertical. And in the Zoni, they have the 2. So we do see the 2 in some decks. We have seen it before. Trying not to get these too messed up, because it becomes a nightmare after you do a video like this where you have all these cards and it's like the panic afterwards not to screw up the order. Okay. The Page of Swords. Barefoot, carefree youth, outdoors. Fancy pants, outdoors. Same. More or less same. So with the outdoors, you know, with the pages and the knights, you know, you might get the sense that, you know, what were they? They were assisting. You know, the page assistant a knight. He assisted a knight, right? It was the valet, right? And then the knight assisted the monarchy. So part of their jobs could have been errands, you know, running around. Could have been. And here we have the other knights. We're all scimitar looking sword there. Again, the dots on the sword. The Queen. I can never tell who's the king or queen in these, but oh yeah, he's got to be, because he's got a beard. Okay. The Queen. And those dots. Like what, right there, right? Kind of weird. The king. No, maybe I got them mixed up after all. I thought, oh, those are her lips, my bad. All right, so this was the queen, I apologize. This was the queen. See, it's confusing, right? And this is the king. So sometimes it can get very confusing. But here's the king, you know, very clear to understand who he is because he's got a beard. He's an older gentleman. Here, he's just, I don't know, it's just a kid. Same. Okay, moving on to the suit of cups. So a very lovely chalice or, you know, fancy cup with fantastic creatures. You know, a reference to maybe a fountain with birds or just a fancy, fancy chalice with a crown. So these Ace of Cups, you know, look different from the other Aces of Cups that we've seen that look more like this, right? So sometimes, you know, ooh, I'm sorry. Sometimes you can identify, you know, a region just by one or two cards. You know, like the ace. I can identify the ace, you know, looking like this as a style from Bologna. Maybe I won't always catch the other cards or, you know, catch, you know, where they're from, but sometimes there's just, you know, the Ace of Cups of the Piedmont region too is different because it was like a big bowl of flowers in some of them. Okay, now remember the Mitelli skips 2 through 5. And I don't know if these decks rightly should have 2 through 5, if they're recreations for the sake of our convenience in modern day, trying to read the cards. So these might have just very well been recreations. But in the Zoni, they're not. Because again, it was for probably the French set. Okay. I'll move along here. I'll skip these cards as well. Okay, so the Six of Cups, we have a very different style of cup. More like very domestic, right? Just something that, you know, maybe a family who might have, you know, the ability to have a fancy, you know, glassware, but kind of like domestic, you know, whereas here there's like religious or super fancy, you know, goblet. Here, not so fancy. And we see the configuration of 6 and an extra, 6 and an extra. But that's not what we have here. We have the extra in the center, in keeping with the Tarot of Marseille. So this is an unusual, you know, arrangement. Is unique. Maybe this would be another way of identifying the Bolognese decks, right? With the way the 7 is. 8, again. Different from what was being done in France, right? I know this isn't a French deck. I'm referencing that this was being exported to France. So the arrangement of the cards. And here they're the same because, I mean, you know, 3 rows of 3. You can't get much more convenient in that arrangement. Similarity with the 10s, because just like die, right, or just like dice, you know, the 5s have that kind of configuration. 2 sets of 5 makes it easy to register, right? 2 sets of 5, you think of them as like dominoes or die. You can readily recognize that. But then we have the more French, you know, style of 3 rows of 3 and a 10th, and we see it elsewhere too. Okay, so the pages. So here we have a youth, probably, I can't tell if it's male or female, just maybe someone younger than puberty, you know. It could be very non-specific. Here we have clearly a female, like a maid, right? Like some type of maiden. And then we have who we're used to seeing with this thing draped over his cup and the hat that he carries in his hand and the wreath of flowers in his hair, where I've discussed this image a number of times. I love this night. You get the back view, like, see ya. And if you think of like emotional, you know, circumstances with the Suit of Cups or whatever, if this were to pop up in a love reading or something, you know, it'd be like, see ya. You know, he's gone. You know, and that would be a real visual way to read the card, to understand the card, without, you know, maybe, you know, trying to identify, you know, the court, you know, court status, you know, and in combination with the cup, you know, the suit, right? I mean, here, you know, it almost gives you the meaning just visually, like, without having to do any of, like, legwork, you know. This would be a card, in other words, that I would probably interpret for its vision rather than my understanding of what the Knight of Cups might represent. Although he may be all those things, but he's just leaving the scenario. And more in keeping with what we're accustomed to. The Queen. Those dots. Now we see a window, which is interesting. Is that a window? It's hard to tell. King of Cups. Ace of Baton. So in the Mitelli, it's more like a cudgel. And, you know, in these Bolognese decks, even in the remaining pips, they are batons. Oh, I have the wrong suit here. My apologies. So this is more like a cudgel, in keeping with what we see from, you know, out of Marseille. Okay, and the two, we skipped 2 to 5, so, which these may have been recreations themselves just for us. I can't speak with authority, so, but I'm skipping it just because we're familiar with what they look like pretty much. Again, very much like, reminds me of the Vachetta, which is now reminding me of a future video to do. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm not telling you because sometimes I notice that I do something and then somebody gets, you know, what they do it before I get around to it. You know, so I don't want to do that this time, but it's making me think of another video to do. And it's not a comparison of the Vachetta and it. Okay, 7. Really pretty. And then what we're used to seeing. So the, you know, the Zoni, which was being marketed for the French, we see that the ace of batons is the cudgel. And then it goes into the more refined baton. Whereas with the more traditional Bolognese decks, the cudgel doesn't exist here. It's more just real batons from the ace on. Okay. I guess I'm just showing these cards now because these are so pretty. And so we have a woman, a man rather, an older man, perched before fire. I don't see readily what's in his hands. Maybe he's just warming himself. And then we have a ladder. I don't know. Well, I don't get anything like that from these. So the Mitelli, what a beautiful deck, right? Oh, I think. All right, and then like the 10 of the other suit of swords, we have the batons with the extra. So that may be a Bolognese thing and what we're used to seeing. And now the page, the knight, the queen, and the king of baton. Interestingly, in these, they're all cudgels. They're all like baseball bat kind of things, right? The cudgel, more cudgel-like. Here, it's true blue baton, you know, no cudgels. And those dots, he almost looks like he's like in a swarm of mosquitoes or something, or bugs. And for those of you who are so patient, the last suit, the suit of coins. And we skip 2 through 5. So we have this, 6, and 7, 8. We have faces on the coins in this early 1660 Bolognese deck. And we have, very interesting, we have a youth with a satchel of coin, a knight carrying his coin, the queen losing her coin or spending it, or being reckless with it because she doesn't have to care. And the king, like he just counted his coin. Very beautiful deck. And a reference to the hare and the dog, so hunting on the ace. So they have their own look. The aces of the Bolognese decks have their own look. Decidedly female. And I think that was the case in the Bolognese with the cups. I forgot to point that out. So the Bolognese, it looks like for the page or the valet, we have maidens. Oh, I think I did point it out. We have maidens, right? We have girls in the suits of coin and cup. Again, the reference to the hunt and the hare and the hound. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the last deck, which would be in keeping with Tarot of Marseille. Again, look at all those dots. Makes me crazy. Now, not so feminine there. So I can't say it's absolute. Well, oh right, this is for TDM. Forget about it. This is following the French tradition. So we have a few things then, like with the Bologna style, right? Particularly evident in the Fine della Torre and in the Mondo. We have the pattern of pick cards. You know, we have different images, for the fool, a musical instrument, a performer. They have different looks, right? So, sometimes when you just familiarize yourself with decks, you start to recognize, maybe you never saw that deck before, but if you look at a few key cards, you might be able to tell what region of Italy it may have been from or what country it may have been from, which is why, it's great to know your cards, your historic cards. So even though, the Tarot of Bologna, by Lo Scarabeo here, technically is from Bologna, we know that it wasn't catering to an Italian audience because of cards 2 through 5. Would have been illegal past 1725, I mean, all their cards, they replaced these. I don't know if it's illegal now, and I'm not saying it is, but these would not have been for an Italian audience. So these, although they were created in Italy, in Bologna, probably for exportation to France, for a French audience, or wherever else they played with this particular style that wasn't Bologna and would not offend the king, or the Pope. So I hope this has been at least interesting for you, and I appreciate that you hung in there and watched, and that you feel that there is some value to these types of videos, because there are. I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, and I'm not like the world's greatest scholar, with tarot or anything else. I only observe the cards, I read a lot, but I have problems retaining information. I've probably forgotten more than some people ever learn, But my real education comes from just looking at the cards, and getting a different understanding of the meaning. If we see this card, if we see the Fool card, not as a crazy person or a madman, but maybe as a performer, it gives a different meaning, or another layer of meaning that could be applicable to whatever question you or your client is asking, right? If somebody's asking about, should I, go into my music career? Should I go, do something with music? And then this card pops up. Well, it's quite different message than you would get from the Fool of another deck, right? Because then this would be, go for it, take your chance, right? Because we have the visual of a musician. And this musician is even hard on his luck. I don't know what this guy is, but if he's a musician, yeah, he's a little harder on his luck. So maybe if he popped up, I'd say that maybe not a great idea. But these two guys, it seems like a fine idea to take a risk or take a chance, right? So when when you see different decks and you become aware of different decks, it helps enhance your interpretation of the card and how it might relay to a particular question that your particular client had or that you had that day. So thank you for hanging in there. This is a much longer video than I care to make, but I hope it's been instructful and insightful. And until next time, friends, peace and stay well.